I was standing in my son Michael's driveway, looking at my grandson Tommy's skateboard, lying on its side near the garage door. The wheel was still spinning slowly. Something about that image made my chest tighten, but I didn't know why yet. I picked it up and walked toward the front door. Jessica answered. My daughter-in-law had that look on her face, the one she always wore when I visited, like she was doing me a favor by letting me into my own son's house. Oh, Richard, you're early. I said I'd be here at 5. It's 5. She didn't move from the doorway. We're just getting dinner ready. Michael's in the shower. I held up the skateboard. Tommy left this outside. Where is he? In his room. She finally stepped aside, but just barely. I had to turn sideways to get past her. The house smelled like roasted turkey. Thanksgiving was still a week away, but they were doing an early dinner because Jessica's father was in town, Frank Morrison. The name alone made my jaw clench. I'd met Frank exactly 3 times in the 5 years since Michael married Jessica. Each time, he'd made it clear what he thought of me. Factory worker. He'd called me at the wedding, loud enough for half the reception to hear. Well, somebody has to tighten the bolts, right? Then he'd laughed and slapped Michael on the back like they were old friends. My son had just smiled and changed the subject. That's what Michael did. He was a good accountant, made decent money, but he'd never learned to stand up for himself. Or for me. I found Tommy in his room, sitting on his bed with his tablet. He was 7 years old, small for his age, with Michael's dark hair and my mother's blue eyes. When he saw me, his face lit up. Grandpa. Hey, buddy. I sat down next to him. You left your skateboard outside. Wheel could get rusted if it rains. Oh. He looked down. Sorry. Grandpa Frank said I was too old to be playing with baby toys anyway. My hand tightened on the skateboard. Grandpa Frank said that? Tommy nodded. He said when he was my age, he was already working on real cars and making real money. He said my dad babied me too much. I took a slow breath. Frank had been in town for 2 days, staying in Michael's guest room, and I was already hearing about it. Well, Grandpa Frank doesn't know everything. You're 7. You're supposed to play. That's what Dad said. But then Grandpa Frank got mad and said Dad was raising me to be soft. I wanted to ask more, but Jessica called from downstairs. Richard, dinner's ready. The dining room table was set like something from a magazine. Fine china I'd never seen before. Cloth napkins, candles. Frank sat at the head of the table, even though it was Michael's house. He was a big man, 6'2", still broad in the shoulders at 68. He wore a polo shirt with a golf club logo and a watch that probably cost more than my truck. Michael was already seated, looking uncomfortable in a button-down shirt he'd probably just put on. Jessica bustled around, serving food. Tommy slipped into the chair next to me. Richard. Frank didn't stand up or offer his hand. Wasn't sure you'd make it. You asked me to come to dinner at my son's house? Well, Jessica mentioned she'd invited you. Wanted to make sure you felt included. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. How's retirement treating you? Must be nice, not having to punch a clock anymore. It's fine. What'd you do again? Some kind of factory work? I'd been expecting this. Frank asked me the same question every time we met, like he couldn't remember or didn't care. I worked for the government. Right. Government factory. What'd they make, paper clips? He laughed at his own joke. Jessica smiled nervously. Michael studied his plate. Something like that. We started eating. Frank dominated the conversation, talking about his real estate developments, his golf handicap, his new car. Jessica hung on every word. Michael occasionally tried to contribute, but Frank would cut him off or change the subject. Then Frank turned to Tommy. So, kiddo, what do you want to be when you grow up? Tommy looked at me, then back at Frank. I don't know yet. Maybe a teacher? Frank's face soured. A teacher? That's what you aspire to? Working for peanuts in a public school? Michael started. I'm serious, Michael. The boy needs ambition. When I was his age, I already knew I was going to be rich. I wasn't dreaming about some government job with a pension. Jessica jumped in. Dad's right, honey. Tommy should be thinking bigger. Maybe business school someday, like you went to. I set down my fork. Tommy's 7 years old. He's got time to figure out what he wants. Frank looked at me like I'd just appeared at the table. Well, that's the problem right there. That's the attitude that keeps people stuck. My daughter married up, Richard. She came from my world, your son. He gestured at Michael. No offense, but he came from yours. I've been trying to teach him to think differently, but it's hard when certain influences are still around. The table went silent. Jessica's face was red. Michael was frozen, his fork halfway to his mouth. Tommy looked confused. Certain influences, I repeated. Look, I'm just being honest. You seem like a nice enough guy, but you're blue collar. There's nothing wrong with that, but let's not pretend it's something to aspire to. I'm trying to raise my grandson to be somebody, and that means surrounding him with the right examples. I felt that old familiar sensation, the one I'd spent 30 years learning to control. My heart rate slowing down instead of speeding up, my vision sharpening, my voice getting quieter instead of louder. I see. I'm glad you understand. Jessica, this turkey is excellent. The conversation moved on. I stayed quiet, watching. Frank drank 3 glasses of wine with dinner. His voice got louder. He told a story about forcing a contractor to redo work at half price by threatening to sue. Jessica laughed. Michael attempted a smile. Tommy pushed his food around his plate. After dinner, Frank insisted everyone come to the living room. He had presents, he announced. Early Christmas gifts. For Jessica, a pair of expensive earrings. For Michael, a golf club membership. For Tommy, a savings bond. It's for college, Frank explained. But only if he goes to a real school, not some community college. Tommy was 7. He didn't understand what any of that meant. He just nodded and said thank you. Frank turned to me. Sorry, Richard. I didn't get you anything. Wasn't sure you'd be here. That's fine. Although, I suppose I should thank you. You raised Michael, and despite everything, he turned out okay. Found himself a good woman from a good family. Hopefully, Tommy inherits more from Jessica's side. That's when Michael finally spoke up. Dad, maybe we should. Maybe you should what? Frank's voice had an edge now. The wine was really hitting him. I'm complimenting your father, Michael. I'm saying he did an adequate job, given his limitations. I think Richard's done more than adequate, Michael said quietly. Frank laughed. Oh, please. Look at where you grew up. Look at where Tommy's growing up now. This house, this neighborhood, this life. You didn't get this from your father's factory salary. You got it because my daughter saw potential in you, and I helped finance your career. That wasn't true. Michael had paid for his own education with loans and scholarships, but I could see my son shrinking in his chair, not contradicting his father-in-law. I didn't realize you financed Michael's career, I said. Well, not directly. But who do you think introduced him to the partners at his firm? Who do you think gave him the credibility to get that position? In this world, Richard, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And you didn't know anybody. Tommy had wandered over to the window. He was looking out at the backyard, where his basketball hoop stood. Can I go play? He asked. It's almost dark, Jessica said. Just for a few minutes? Tommy pleaded. Let the boy play, Frank said. He needs to burn off that energy. Get some real exercise instead of playing with those video games all day. Tommy went outside. Through the window, I watched him grab his basketball and start shooting. He missed the first few shots. The ball bounced into the flower bed. Frank was still talking, something about a real estate deal. Then he stopped mid-sentence and stood up. Is he trampling Jessica's flowers? I looked out the window. Tommy had retrieved the ball from the flower bed. A few petals had fallen off the flowers, but nothing was damaged. Those are imported tulips, Frank said, heading for the back door. Cost me $200 to have them planted last spring. Frank, it's fine, Jessica started, but he was already outside. I stood up. Something in my gut told me to move. By the time I reached the back door, Frank was in the yard, yelling at Tommy. My grandson was holding the basketball, his face pale. Teach you to respect property? This is exactly what I'm talking about. Your father lets you run wild, and this is what happens. I'm sorry, Tommy said, his voice shaking. I didn't mean... Sorry doesn't fix the flowers, Frank grabbed the basketball from Tommy's hands and threw it across the yard. It bounced off the fence with a bang. Maybe if someone actually disciplined you instead of coddling you, you'd learn. Frank. I was walking across the yard now. That's enough. He turned on me. Oh, now the factory worker has opinions on child rearing? You raised a pushover, Richard. I'm trying to make sure my grandson doesn't end up the same way. Tommy was crying now. Michael and Jessica had come outside, but they were frozen on the patio. Apologize to my grandson, I said quietly. Frank laughed. Excuse me? You threw his ball. You made him cry. Apologize. I don't think so. This is my daughter's house, and I'll discipline my grandson however I see fit. This is my son's house. That's my grandson, and you're going to apologize. Frank stepped closer to me. He had 2 inches on me and probably 30 pounds. Or what, old man? You gonna make me? I didn't move. I just looked at him. 30 years of experience told me exactly what kind of man I was dealing with. The kind who was used to bullying people who couldn't fight back. The kind who'd never faced real consequences. Go inside, Tommy, I said. Tommy ran past us, toward the house. Jessica caught him and hugged him. Michael was standing there, looking between me and Frank. You need to leave, Frank said. Before I make you leave. Frank, please, Jessica said from the patio. Let's just calm down. No. Frank's face was red, veins popping in his neck. I've been patient with this situation, but I'm done. Your father, he pointed at Michael, doesn't respect me. He doesn't respect what I've built or what I've provided for this family. And I won't have him undermining my authority with my grandson. Your grandson? I said. Tommy is Michael's son, and Michael is married to my daughter, which makes Tommy my responsibility. Someone has to teach him to be a man, since his father won't. Michael flinched like he'd been slapped. That's when something inside me shifted. I'd accepted Frank's disrespect toward me. I'd stayed quiet when he belittled my career, my life, my choices. But watching him tear down my son, watching Michael shrink and accept it, watching Tommy cry, I think you should leave, I said. Frank laughed. I'm staying in this house. You're the guest. You leave. This is Michael's house. He can decide who stays. We both looked at Michael. My son opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Maybe we should all just take a breath. Pathetic, Frank muttered. Then he turned back to me. You know what your problem is, Richard? You raised your son to be weak. No backbone. No ambition. He would have been nothing without Jessica. And Jessica would have been nothing without me. You contributed exactly 0 to your grandson's future, and yet you stand here acting like you have some kind of authority. I raised my son to be kind, I said. To be honest. To work hard. Maybe that doesn't mean much in your world, but it means something in mine. Your world? Frank's voice was getting louder. Your world is obsolete. Men like you are dinosaurs. You worked in a factory, you got your pension, and now you're just taking up space. Men like me, we build things. We create wealth. We matter. Is that right? That's right. And I'm tired of pretending otherwise. I'm tired of having you around, dragging down the tone, reminding everyone of where Michael came from. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. You're going to stop showing up uninvited. And you're going to let me raise my grandson the right way. Tommy was watching from the patio, still crying. Michael was pale. Jessica looked torn, and Frank was standing there, chest puffed out, waiting for me to back down. I'd spent 30 years of my life dealing with men worse than Frank Morrison. I dealt with drug lords and gang leaders and cartel hitmen. I'd learned when to fight and when to wait, when to speak and when to stay silent. And I'd learned that the most dangerous thing you could do was underestimate someone. Okay, I said. Frank blinked. Okay? Okay. I'll leave. I started walking toward the house. Good. Finally. Some common sense. I stopped at the patio, looked at Michael. Son, can I use your home office for a minute? I need to make a phone call. Michael nodded, confused. I went inside, past Jessica and Tommy, down the hall to the small office Michael used for working from home. I closed the door and pulled out my cell phone. The number was one I hadn't called in 3 years. Not since I'd retired. But it was still in my contacts, and I knew it was still active. He answered on the second ring. Curtis. Marcus. It's Richard Brennan. A pause. Rich? Jesus, it's been a while. How's retirement? Complicated. I need a favor. Name it. I need you to run a name through the system. Frank Morrison, 68 years old, lives in Connecticut, real estate developer. I could hear Marcus typing. Any particular reason? Just a hunch. More typing. Then a low whistle. Oh, Rich, your hunches were always good. Give me an hour. I'll call you back. I hung up and sat there for a moment. Through the door, I could hear raised voices. Frank was still going, probably feeling triumphant. I'd seen it 100 times before. People who thought they'd won. When I came out of the office, Frank was on the couch, another glass of wine in his hand. Michael was cleaning up the dinner dishes. Jessica was putting Tommy to bed. Phone call done? Frank asked. Good. Now get out. I'm leaving, I said. I looked at Michael. Can I talk to you outside for a second? Michael followed me to the driveway. He looked miserable. Dad, I'm sorry. I should have said something, but Frank, he's Jessica's father, and she really values his opinion, and I didn't want to cause problems. Michael, I put my hand on his shoulder. I need you to trust me on something. Tomorrow, things are going to change. Can you trust me? He looked confused. What do you mean? Just trust me. And keep Tommy home from school tomorrow. Call in sick if you have to. Why? Because I'm asking you to. Please. Michael searched my face, then nodded slowly. Okay, Dad, if you say so. I hugged my son. He hugged me back, and for a second, he was 10 years old again, hugging me after I'd come home from a long assignment. Back when he thought I just worked in an office. Back before I'd made the decision not to tell him what I really did. I'd retired from the DEA 3 years ago. For 30 years, I'd worked undercover operations, investigations, and bust coordinations. I'd been part of teams that had taken down some of the largest drug operations on the East Coast. I'd testified in federal court 19 times. I had commendations from 3 different presidents. Michael didn't know any of that. When he was young, I'd told him I worked for the government in an administrative role. As he got older, the lie became easier to maintain. I traveled a lot. I couldn't talk about work, but the paychecks were steady. When he'd asked directly what I did, I'd told him I worked in logistics at a federal facility. He'd assumed some kind of warehouse or manufacturing. I'd let him assume. It had been for his safety, and for mine. The less he knew, the less anyone could use him to get to me. But it also meant that he'd grown up thinking his dad was just a regular working-class guy with a boring government job. Frank Morrison thought I was a factory worker. He thought I was nobody. That was fine. I'd learned a long time ago that being underestimated was an advantage. My phone rang at 9:30 that night. Marcus. Rich, you still there? Yeah. Frank Morrison is interesting. Real estate developer, like you said. But here's what's interesting. 3 of his properties are flagged in our system. We've been tracking large cash transactions going through his holding companies for the past 18 months. The field office in Hartford thinks he's laundering money for a criminal organization. They just haven't been able to prove it yet. What kind of organization? You remember the Vaccaro family? I remembered. Old school organized crime, trying to modernize. They're still operating? Trying to. They've been looking for legitimate business fronts. Real estate is perfect for it. Buy a property with dirty money, flip it, sell it with clean money. Morrison's been doing high-volume transactions, always just under the reporting threshold. Textbook laundering. Have you made a case yet? Not yet. We're building it, but it's slow. These guys are careful. Why? What's your interest? I told him about the evening, about Frank threatening my grandson, about the way he'd talked to Michael. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Rich, I can't just arrest someone because they're an asshole. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to look at him closer. If he's dirty, find it. We're already looking. But I can make sure the Hartford office knows he's priority. Maybe they move a little faster. Maybe they start watching his movements a little closer. Would that help? It would. Consider it done. Rich, good to hear your voice, man. Don't be a stranger. I hung up and sat in my living room. I lived in a small house about 20 minutes from Michael's place. It was old, needed work, but it was paid off. I'd bought it with cash when I'd retired. My pension was decent, not extravagant. I drove a 15-year-old pickup truck. I wore clothes from discount stores. To someone like Frank Morrison, I looked like exactly what he thought I was, a nobody. The next morning, I got a call from Michael. "Dad, I kept Tommy home like you asked, but I don't understand what's going on. Jessica's confused too. Frank's acting weird." "Weird how?" "He got a phone call this morning. He won't say who from, but he's been in the guest room ever since, making more calls. He looks worried." "Okay, just stay there. I'm coming over." When I arrived, Frank's Mercedes was still in the driveway, but there was also an unfamiliar black sedan parked on the street. As I walked to the door, two men in suits got out of the sedan. "Richard Brennan?" one of them asked. "That's me." They showed me badges. FBI. "We're looking for Frank Morrison. Is he inside?" "He's staying with my son." "What's this about?" "We have some questions for Mr. Morrison regarding his business dealings. Your name came up in our files." "DEA. Retired?" "That's right." The agent smiled. "Small world. Listen, we're going to need to talk to Morrison. You might want to wait out here." But I went in with them. Michael opened the door, saw the badges, and went pale. "What's happening?" "FBI," I said. "They need to talk to Frank." Jessica appeared in the hallway. "What? Why?" Frank came out of the guest room. When he saw the agents, his face went white. "What is this?" "Frank Morrison," the first agent said. "We need you to come with us to answer some questions about financial transactions associated with your real estate holdings." "I don't know what you're talking about." "We have evidence of structured cash transactions, sir. We have warrants to search your business premises and financial records. You're not under arrest, but we strongly suggest you cooperate." Frank looked at me. Something in his face changed. The arrogance was gone. In its place was the sudden understanding of someone who'd just realized they'd made a massive mistake. "You," he said. "You did this." "I made a phone call," I said quietly. "You son of a—" "Dad!" Jessica moved between us. "What's he talking about? What's going on?" The agents were patient. They explained that they'd been investigating Frank's businesses, that there were serious questions about the source of his funding and the nature of his transactions, that he needed to come to the field office immediately. Frank kept staring at me. "Who are you?" "I'm exactly who I said I was. I worked for the government, just not in a factory." Michael's voice was barely a whisper. "Dad?" I looked at my son. "We'll talk later. Right now, you need to think about protecting your family." The agents took Frank. He went quietly, but he kept looking back at me. Jessica was crying. She kept asking what was happening, but nobody had good answers yet. After they left, Michael sat down at the kitchen table. "Dad, I don't understand. What just happened? Who were those people? Why did Frank say you did this?" I sat across from him. Tommy was still in his room, but I could see Jessica hovering in the hallway, listening. "Michael, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago. I didn't work in a factory. I didn't work in manufacturing, or logistics, or any of those things. I was a DEA agent. For 30 years. He stared at me. "What?" "I worked undercover operations. Drug enforcement. I couldn't tell you because it wasn't safe. The less you knew, the safer you were. After I retired, I never found the right time to explain. 30 years. Michael's voice was hollow. 30 years, and you never told me. I'm sorry. All those times, all those conversations about work, about careers, about life, you were lying? I was protecting you. And Frank? What does this have to do with him?" I explained what Marcus had told me, about the laundering investigation, about the Vaccaro family connection, about how Frank's behavior last night had prompted me to make a call to an old colleague. Michael's face went through several emotions: shock, anger, confusion, then something else. "You got him investigated because of what he said to you?" "No. I got him investigated because of what he said to you, and what he did to Tommy." Jessica had come fully into the room now. She looked devastated. "My father is a criminal?" "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "But if he is, it's better you find out now." "And you just made a phone call and destroyed his life?" I made a phone call to people who were already investigating him. I just moved them along. If your father is innocent, he'll be fine. But we all knew he wasn't innocent. You could see it in the way Frank had looked when he'd seen those badges. The next few days were chaos. The FBI raided Frank's offices. They seized financial records, computers, hard drives. The news picked it up. Local press called him a real estate mogul with organized crime ties. His business partners started distancing themselves. Properties were frozen. Accounts were locked. Jessica moved back to her father's house in Connecticut to help him deal with it. She took Tommy with her. Michael stayed behind, caught between his wife and his father. 3 weeks later, Frank was arrested. Federal charges, money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and about 6 other things I didn't fully understand. The evidence was overwhelming. For nearly 2 years, he'd been the primary money launderer for a mid-level criminal organization. His real estate empire was built on dirty money. Michael called me the night of the arrest. "Dad, Jessica wants a divorce." My heart sank. "Michael, I'm sorry. She says you destroyed her family. She says I should have defended her father, she says." He was crying. I drove over and found him alone in his house, sitting in the dark. "I don't know what to do," he said. "I love Jessica, but Dad, was he always like that? Frank, was I just too stupid to see it?" "You weren't stupid. You were trying to make your marriage work. You were trying to keep the peace. He called you a factory worker. He said I came from nothing. He said Tommy needed a better example than you." Michael's voice broke, and I just sat there. "I didn't defend you. I didn't defend myself. I'm exactly what he said I was. Weak." "No." I gripped his shoulder. "You're not weak. You're kind. You're thoughtful. You try to avoid conflict because you want people to be happy. Those are good qualities, Michael. They're just qualities that people like Frank take advantage of. But you didn't let him. You didn't just sit there. I've had different experiences than you. I've dealt with different people. That doesn't make me better. It just makes me different." He looked at me with red eyes. "Who are you, really? I mean, I thought I knew you. But 30 years as a DEA agent? How many things did you do that you never told me about? How many times were you in danger? How many times did you lie?" I couldn't answer that. Not honestly. "I don't know who you are," Michael said. "That hurt more than anything," Frank had said. The divorce took 6 months. Jessica got the house. Michael moved into an apartment. Tommy stayed with Jessica in Connecticut, near her father. Michael got him every other weekend. Frank went to trial. I didn't attend, but Marcus kept me updated. The evidence was damning. Recorded conversations, wire transfers, testimony from cooperating witnesses. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, guilty on all counts. Sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 months later. I saw Michael regularly during this time. We'd have dinner, watch football, talk about nothing important. He never asked me more about my career. I never volunteered. There was this distance between us now, like a wall that hadn't been there before. Tommy came to visit once a month. He was confused about everything. He didn't understand why Grandpa Frank was in jail. He didn't understand why his parents weren't together. He asked me once if it was my fault. "Partly," I said honestly. "I made choices that had consequences. But your Grandpa Frank made his own choices too. Bad choices. And sometimes bad choices catch up with people. Mom says, 'You ruined our family.' I know she feels that way. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this. Are you really a secret agent?" I smiled. "Not exactly. But I did work on stopping bad people from doing bad things." "Like Grandpa Frank?" "Yeah, like Grandpa Frank." He thought about that. Was he a bad person? That was a hard question. He did bad things. Whether that makes him a bad person, I don't know, buddy. That's something you'll have to figure out yourself when you're older. Frank's sentencing hearing came. I decided to go. Marcus met me outside the courthouse. "You sure about this, Rich?" "I need to see it through." The courtroom was half full. Jessica was there, looking worn down. Frank's lawyers sat with him at the defense table. He'd aged 10 years and 6 months. His expensive clothes didn't fit right anymore. The judge was a woman in her 50s, efficient and no nonsense. She read through the charges, the convictions, the sentencing guidelines. Frank's lawyer made a statement about his client's remorse, his cooperation, his previously clean record. Then the judge asked if anyone wanted to make a statement. To my surprise, Michael stood up. "Your Honor, I'm Michael Brennan. I'm Frank Morrison's former son-in-law." The judge nodded. "Go ahead, Mr. Brennan." Michael's hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. "I'm not here to defend what Mr. Morrison did, but I want to say something about who he was to me. When I married his daughter, he welcomed me into his family. He gave me advice. He helped me network in my career. He was proud of me, and he told me so. Whatever else he did, whatever crimes he committed, that part was real. I want the court to know that." He sat down. Jessica was crying quietly. I felt a surge of pride. My son had found his voice. Then the judge looked at the audience. "Anyone else?" I stood up. Several heads turned. Frank saw me, and his jaw tightened. "Your Honor, my name is Richard Brennan. I'm Michael's father." "Go ahead, Mr. Brennan." "I'm a retired DEA agent. I spent 30 years working to stop the kind of operations that Mr. Morrison facilitated. I've seen what drugs do to communities, to families, to lives. The money Mr. Morrison laundered came from organizations that profit from human suffering. I don't know if Mr. Morrison thought about that when he was making his deals. I don't know if he cared. But I want the court to know that his actions had real consequences beyond just financial crimes." I sat down. Frank was staring at me with something like hate, or maybe fear. It was hard to tell. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in federal prison. With good behavior, he'd be out in 6. Jessica left the courtroom before they took him away. Michael stayed. He watched as they led Frank out in handcuffs. Outside the courthouse, Michael found me. "Why did you make a statement?" "Because it needed to be said. You ended his life." "No, he ended his own life. He made choices. He worked with criminals. He built his empire on dirty money. I just made sure those choices had consequences." Michael was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Thank you." I looked at him, surprised. "For what you said, in there, about the victims, about what drugs do. You're right. I'd been feeling guilty, like maybe Frank didn't deserve this. But he did. He really did. Your statement was good too. You acknowledged the good parts while not excusing the bad. That took courage. I learned from someone." He gave me a small smile, even if that someone kept a few secrets. We went to dinner that night, just the two of us. And for the first time in months, the wall felt a little lower. It's been 2 years now. Frank is in federal prison in Pennsylvania. Jessica remarried, some guy from her father's country club circle. Tommy spends more time with Michael now. They have a better relationship without Frank's influence. Michael and I have rebuilt our relationship too, slowly. He asks me questions now about my career. I answer what I can. Some things are still classified. Some things I just don't want to remember. But we're honest now, and that's worth something. Tommy is 9. He still asks me questions about my old job. Last month, he told me he wanted to be a police officer when he grew up. Jessica wasn't happy about that. But Michael was proud. I think about that Thanksgiving often. About Frank standing in the backyard, yelling at my grandson, throwing his basketball across the yard. About the way Michael had frozen, unable to defend his own son. About the decision I made to pick up my phone. Someone asked me once if I regretted it, making that call. Setting in motion the investigation that destroyed Frank's life and ended my son's marriage. The truth is, I don't know. Frank was a criminal. He deserved to face justice, but the collateral damage was real. Michael's marriage ended. Tommy lost his family structure. Jessica lost her father. But then I think about something else. I think about Tommy, a month ago, at a Little League game. Another kid's father was yelling at the umpire, getting aggressive, making a scene. Tommy looked at Michael and said, "That's not cool, Dad. He should calm down." Michael agreed. And they both looked at me, and I saw it in their eyes. They understood now what real strength looked like. Not the loud aggression of men like Frank. Not the bullying and the intimidation. But the quiet confidence of knowing your worth without needing to prove it to anyone. People reveal themselves when they think you're harmless. Frank revealed himself that night. He showed me exactly who he was and what he was willing to do. He thought I was nobody. He thought I couldn't touch him. He was wrong. I'm Richard Brennan. For 30 years, I protected this country from people who thought they were above the law. I did it quietly. I did it without recognition or glory. And when I retired, I thought I was done. But you don't stop being who you are just because you change jobs. When my family needed me, when my grandson was threatened and my son was diminished, I did what I'd always done. I made a call. I used the tools I had. I let the system do its job. Frank Morrison learned an important lesson. So did my son. And maybe, in some small way, so did I. You can call me a factory worker. You can call me a nobody. You can underestimate me all you want. That's fine with me. I've learned over the years that being underestimated is the best advantage you can have. Because when people think you're harmless, they show you who they really are. And sometimes, that's all the information you need.